Welcome back, or if it's your first time, I'm glad to have you here. I'm Matt Fendora, and you're tuned in to the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast, where we journey together toward becoming the best version of ourselves. Using mind, body, heart, and spirit as the anchors of our podcast, join me as we set sail into the depths of self-discovery, unraveling the interconnected layers that shape our growth. If you resonate with today's conversation, consider subscribing to the podcast. Your support means the world to us and ensures you never miss an empowering episode. Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast, a podcast all about being the best version of yourself through mind, body, heart, and spirit. Today, I am joined by Dr. Krissy Doyle-Thomas. Dr. Krissy is a medical neuroscientist and professor in Ontario, Canada. She is a widely published expert in medical conditions that affect the brain and mental health. She is passionate about helping people maximize their potential as it relates to understanding how the brain works. She is committed to translating scientific research into terms and practices that can help communities live healthy, mindful lives. Dr. Krissy is a distinguished educator and mental health consultant who co-developed and teaches in Ontario's inaugural graduate certificate programs in brain disorders management and mental health and disability management. Her research program focuses on well-being and empowerment within the Black Canadian community, particularly in the realm of mental health. Known for her ability to convey complex concepts to diverse audiences, Dr. Krissy is a sought-after mental health consultant, frequently presenting at various organizations and community agencies. Her notable recognitions include features in the 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women book, the 4th edition, and CBC News's HERStory In Black documentary, underscore her commitment to advancing health education within the community. Her influence extends beyond academia, emphasizing community engagement and empowerment in the realm of mental health. What makes Dr. Krissy's heart sing? Her passion for helping people understand how they can improve or maintain good mental health by understanding how the brain works. Without further ado, here's Dr. Krissy. How are you doing today, Dr. Krissy?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing outstanding. Really excited because I follow you. I've been following you for a while now on social media, and I love everything that you share. It's so insightful, and it always makes me want to go in and start researching things, like trying to understand things better.
Oh, well, thank you so much for those kind words. That is exactly the intention of what I do on social media is trying to engage folks with new science or reminding them about what science says about wellness and mental health and those lifestyle tips that we can give. So I appreciate that it reaches you in a wonderful way. And I follow you as well. So congratulations on your podcast and all the amazing things that you're doing. Thank you for being such a vehicle of knowledge for the community. So congrats to you as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. What sparked your interest and your passion in becoming a neuroscientist?
Well, it was interesting. From the very early on when I was young, I always wanted to become a doctor, but I thought it was a medical doctor. I didn't think it was a scientist. What was interesting about my journey is that I was born in Trinidad, so my family is Trinidadian, and we migrated to Canada when I was 9 years of age. And I am the third of four girls. And my youngest sister had a number of complications when she was born. So she was 7 pounds. She was born at 7 months. She was 1.5 pounds, really, really little girl. And she was also deprived of oxygen in the whole birthing process. So because of that, there were implications to her brain development, the ability for her to meet different developmental milestones. And this was an interesting space for a new immigrant family within Canada to navigate. So she was 3 at the time when we first started to see that developmentally she was delayed. So at that time we were navigating a brand new system. as an immigrant family, learning new things about child development, brain development, the medical complications that my sister was dealing with. And being so kind of attuned to medical stuff to begin with, I was really intrigued by my sister's journey. I was also very much aware of the impact it was having on my family, right? Just outside of navigating the medical space, how was it affecting our mental health and our wellness and the family dynamic? My parents did a fantastic job, keeping us together and navigating that space. But it had a really big impact. So growing up, I was, of course, wanting to become a medical doctor. Went to my undergrad, took a psych course, and I was like, "Wow, this is super intriguing," and it really resonating on me where you connect brain and behavior. Within that, there was a neuroscience unit. And I was like, this is where I'm staying forever. Like, this is just the right type of information that really excites me and provides an opportunity to get the answers to many questions that I had for a long time, just growing up with my sister, seeing the impact on my family, and also wondering about how many other families might be really dealing with, brain-based disorders that impact a lot of dynamics across life. So after that neuroscience course, I decided to specialize in neuroscience going from there. Completed, of course, my undergrad in psych, and then went and did medical neurosciences for my master's, and then finished with the medical sciences PhD degree. So it was a desire to become a medical doctor, and then kind of ran into a research course and was like, yes, this is where I want to be for the rest of my life, and just kind of stuck it through.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think one of the most inspiring pieces here is the fact that how supportive your family was of the entire situation, because I think it's so easy for a parent to just kind of push people aside and push that down, like, hey, that's not a big deal, don't worry about this. Like the problems that your sister was having, like, you don't have to deal with that, like, don't be involved in that at all, like, that's our problem. Or to downplay it and kind of ostracize that position itself, like the position that they're in. They could have easily done that, and that would have changed the course of your entire life, where you wouldn't have been impacted in neuroscience or being a doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one thing that my family has always done. We've walked through life as a unit, right? And I think it's interesting because when someone has a life experience, some situation that happens to them personally, it affects their relationships. It reflects the way they show up in life. It reflects the way that they connect with their loved ones and connect with the community. It affects the way they look for resources, maybe manage their money, right? All of these things are impacted because of something that happens to them. So
Mhm.
I think within our family, my sister's health was always at the forefront. Like, what are we going to do next? Where are we going to live? How close are we to doctors? What kind of services is she going to get? What kind of schools are we going to put her into? And being such a close-knit family, we had a lot of family meetings, right? Where we would just, and it might have been over a meal when we're having like Sunday lunch or so, when we're just talking about life and realizing that I don't think it was purposeful for my parents to say, you guys are part of this decision, but it was an open conversation where we were talking about life, what's happening with all of us, and realizing that life can get complicated when you're supporting someone who has a brain-based condition, right?
Mhm.
Medical condition that needs support. So I think from that, I was always involved in those conversations, always interested in seeing how is this impacting life, and just how it impacted like my motivation to get knowledge in that area as well. So
Mhm.
it definitely impacted my life trajectory, being part of a family, managing, this kind of this area of how do we live with a loved one who needs medical support across their lifespan.
Hmm. What lessons do you feel like you could take away from being that childhood experiences of having the learning all about that prior to learning what neuroscience was? Like what lessons did you learn from those challenges?
I think at the time, there are a lot of lessons. I think growing up, some things that really stood out to me a lot was that being an immigrant in a new country, there are lessons just within that. How do you navigate that space where you're learning the health system, and you might not know where you are interacting with folks and you have an accent, that's different from the one that they have. You have access to different kind of resources than they have, whether that's a good or a bad thing. So I think a lesson that I learned from that I take into my work right now is understanding that everyone's experience in interacting with the health system is unique. And there are intersections that could impact that experience, whether it's cultural intersections, gender identities, ethnicities, all these kinds of things that these multiple identities that people have that becomes a factor when they're engaging in somewhat of a universal system. We have a universal health system here in Canada, right? But my experience as a young immigrant family might be different from a Canadian's experience. So, and because we have different identities interacting with the very same system. So from a lesson that I took away for that is that from that experience is that we have to honor the space that different people hold when accessing healthcare, when accessing information, and providing an opportunity for everyone to come out with the same gains, right? I might need more support. I might need you to break down what these medical terms mean to me or what resources I can access, whereas some other Canadian might already know these terms and not need support in understanding what it means. Maybe they have a different educational level of completion or what, but we all need effective care. So how do we ensure that all of these different types of people are walking away with the same benefits? And that's a big reason why I do what I do on social media, because I want people to say that, yes, folks are going to get the information, but I want someone who looks like me, who has had my lived experience, to connect to it in a way that they can feel free to ask me questions because I look familiar. That's something that they may not feel comfortable asking their doctor, who may have a different ethnicity than them, because they might feel judged or they might feel looked down on. And that's not to say that they are, but there might be an impression or a fear when you know that you're different, right? So that's a big lesson that really came out of that lived experience for me, and why I try to be so accessible within social media and even within my work in supporting the Black community, Black Canadian community, to say, I'm here as a resource for you. Ask me questions where I know I would support, where I don't, I'll connect you to those who do, to make sure that they can as well benefit from the systems that exist and feel comfortable to be vulnerable, and just authentic in spaces where they do need information. The medical kind of arena is a very tricky thing where people are handling a lot of stresses in life. And you don't want to add an additional barrier to that if you don't have to.
Mm-hmm. So I know I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I know that right now you're working with the mental health with the Black communities. What does that look like right now? Like, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say that I hope the work I do benefits everyone. But I am very aware that there are some real barriers with mental health care where we understand the Black experience. And when I say that is that mental health for a long time has been stigmatized, right? Just the idea of someone having mental health and understanding that mental health is different from mental illness. We all have mental health the same way we have physical health,
Mhm.
and the same way for our physical body. And this is a really strange thing to say because the brain is part of the physical body. But when we say physical health, we think about everything from the neck down, our muscles, our heart, our lungs, our digestive system, keeping all of these things healthy and in balance. But the brain is also part of our physical body, and the same attention we pay to keeping the rest of our body healthy is the same attention we have to pay to our brain. and kind of keep and understanding the impact of that and the attention we have to give to the brain where it supports mental health becomes important. So mental health has been stigmatized across the world for a long time. And within the Black community, it's like not it what for a long time it wasn't even a thing, right? If you were having symptoms that look like depression, that you don't have the luxury of laying in bed. You might be a single mother, right, who have
Mm-hmm.
kids to feed, so you have to go to work. So what does depression look like for that single mom, right? What does bipolar looks like for the youth who may be experiencing highs and lows and not understanding why he's experiencing that. So he gets out there and he might get into trouble and steal a candy bar or become aggressive. But when the police shows up, he is treated very differently than someone else who's manifesting the same behavioral kind of patterns, right? So how do we navigate the nuances of being Black in today's society and understanding that below all of those behaviors might be a health condition that can be supported medically, right? But you
Mm-hmm.
have to be aware that it is a health condition and it's not just you being a difficult person or mom needing a day off, let's be quiet in the house, or dad having a low point, let's stay clear because he's coming home drunk. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we have
Mm-hmm.
to understand that sometimes these behaviors are a manifestation of untreated mental illness. And if we bring knowledge and awareness to what illness can look like within the Black community, there might be a light bulb moment that says, oh, I might have something that someone could support me with. So maybe I go see my doctor. Maybe I go see someone who can advise me in this area and get the help I need so I can live a better wellness life, right? So it's just understanding, and this is not only unique for like the Black community. Like, I mean, like we have experiences in all kinds of nationality groups with across, right? Across
Mm-hmm.
the existence of humankind, that kind of thing. So it's just from my perspective, because I have that shared lived experience,
Mm-hmm.
I feel that I can also speak to it from a place of experience, whereas I cannot speak, about a white lived experience or an indigenous lived experience because it's not one that I share. But I can speak to Black lived experience because I am Black, right? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But all in all, I do feel and I do hope that my work spans beyond the Black community. Yes, it is helpfully looking at the intricacies and the uniqueness that we experience in this space to support better diagnosis, better care, better education. So those are my three aims. But also, everyone can benefit from this is what wellness looks like. This is what brain health looks like. This is what mental health looks like. How you apply these lifestyle tips might be unique to you, but science says it works. So let's figure out what that pathway might look like for a Black individual, a white individual, someone else like an indigenous individual, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. One thing that you mentioned, which got me really thinking of, was you mentioned bipolar in the youth. And so, from my understanding, once they're in their adolescent, a child's in their adolescent stage, especially around 15, is when they really start working on their prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
So, how do we know? How can we tell when somebody needs help when it comes to being bipolar when they're changing due to hormones and their brain development? How can we make that differential?
Yeah, and that's a great question, right? And as a scientist, I can tell you some science stuff, but I'm not a clinician. So I think that's a great question for a therapist to really delve into it and give their specific expert opinion on that. What I think, just in general, from where I sit, is when people are acting out of character. We kind of because we are social beings, we kind of sense if something's off in another
Mhm.
person, right? And we also sense their receptiveness of help. And I think if we, in a loving way, approach someone who may be struggling with something and they're acting out of a way that creates a healthy, balanced community around them, and we get them to the people who can go through the diagnostic, assessment and can then say, for this age, at this time in their life, how are they responding against this diagnostic checklist, then the doctor will be able to know for sure. So I think in terms of, we would never know for sure just interacting with someone if they have bipolar disorder or what have you. Neither should we diagnose people from just looking at them. But I think if we notice that someone is acting out of character or acting in a way that just makes us feel like maybe something else is going on there, in a loving way, supporting that person to see someone who can help them understand their behavior and understand if there is a need for medical support beyond just them living life. I think that is our bridge to getting them the help that they need. But you're absolutely right. The prefrontal cortex doesn't develop until about 25 or within our 20s, right? So if it's a difficult place to kind of say how much of this is development and growth and learning, as opposed to how much of this is atypical behavior. But I do feel we can always sense where something is just a little bit too much, where that person might need to see someone, and in a loving way, supporting them with getting the help that they need through getting access to a person that can say more. If they're engaging in problematic behavior where it's a risk to themselves and a risk to others, that's a clean sign that something might be off. And we need to support that person to getting to someone who can see what's going on.
Do you see a difference in mental health when it comes to men versus women?
Yeah, that's interesting. And so from my experience and within within the experience of like the Black Canadian community, I can say that where mental health is already stigmatized, it's a lot harder. This is changing. I'm so happy it is, but it has been historically a lot harder for males to say, I have a mental health issue or a challenge or a need for support. It's really, you got to be tough. You got to like stick it out. Like you can't cry.
Mm-hmm.
You can't express your emotion. It is not a way of showing strength. You understand? And for that to be the narrative for a very long time, even in the way we are raised from generations to generation, the messages that fathers tell their sons, right? Or other male figures tell the younger generations, it's kind of instilled somewhat of a hurdle that now has a barrier that now has to be broken down to allow for a vulnerable space where men feel like they can share their emotions, they can engage in discussing what is happening for them, so that they can get past that or get on some kind of plan to support their wellness. Females historically, right, have just been a little bit more willing to talk about it. And it's not to say that that they always do it the same way. I think that there are folks within both gender categories that could potentially say that I talk about my feelings or I don't talk about my feelings. But in general terms, they might be more willing to confide in a girlfriend or a sister or a parent or someone and talk about where they are. So there is a bit of a difference in the willingness to understand feelings and understand where that intersects with how I'm behaving, how I'm living life, how well I feel, all those kinds of things. So I think one of the first steps will be to break down those barriers to say we are all human. Right? We all have a brain, we all have a body, and our brain goes through similar things regardless of the color of our skin and our lived experience. Our brain goes through similar things in terms of the chemical levels that kind of wax and wane, how they're impacted by lifestyle. And although our lived experience might create some, programming in our brain that puts context around those feelings, we still have we still all have chemicals in our brain that kind of determine our feeling of contentment and satisfaction and happiness and love and all of these things. So understanding that we all exist within the framework of a brain that has these really fundamental ways of being. We just have to understand how our lifestyle intersects with that is where it becomes very interesting.
Do you have any tips on how we can continue to correct that stigma that men have to be strong and men don't have to go see a therapist or talk about their feelings?
Yeah, and so in my experience and what I'm trying to do is having men who have talked about their experience and have seen the benefit of showing that vulnerable space and being willing to get help, have them be the spokesperson for that. I think what's really important and what I've seen within my experience as well is for a long time on social media, I would post really nice sayings and everything was text based and there was no face. There was no face. And I got great, well, not great. I got okay engagement. It was, folks were getting the message. But when I started showing my face and talking about the same message just through my voice and my image, I got so much more engagement from people who look like me.
Mm,
And I thought, okay, yes, it's the same message, but a different way of delivering it, right? And it's connecting more. So I think similarly, when we talk about encouraging folks to embrace a mental health lifestyle and what that looks like, and also address some of the barriers that exist for people who may be hesitant to talk about their mental health and wellness and lifestyle that supports mental health and wellness. You have to get the people out there that looks like the barrier you're trying to break down. So get a man out there talking about his experience. Get a man out there talking about what he has done. And hopefully that gives permission for another man who sees him to say, oh, that guy looks just like me, right? Or that guy's another dude, like, and he's seen the benefit here. Maybe it's something I need to consider. And it's not going to happen right away. It's going to take time and repetition and reinforcement and all these kinds of things. It's going to take repeated messaging to change someone's mind and approach. But the more visibility we give to it, it's the more, I believe, the impact is going to start to change. For example, I have a teenager and a preteen. These are my two kids, my two boys. And when I was growing up, like boys never spoke about how they feel and show emotion. And my kids, they talk about mental health all the time. Like, you know what I mean? It's because the narrative had changed over the course of years where messages that give allowance for us to be very candid about mental health and vulnerability and how this kind of impacts our life is teaching a new generation to embrace their incomplete health from head to toe. So it's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen the more we show
mm,
faces to things that we thought before was a bit taboo. But now, okay, that's someone I can relate to, I can connect to. Maybe it's something I need to try.
mhm. And I think it's so important for parents to be involved in that change because they're going to learn from you. So if you feel like you need to be this stoic person who just holds everything in, I need to be strong, they're going to feel like they have to do the same thing. And there's no shame and there's no weakness in actually expressing your emotion because they need to see that too. I grew up where my father, I never saw him cry. One time in my life, I never saw him cry. And that obviously impacted me because I felt like I had to do the same thing. Like this is my who my role model is. I have to be just like that. And so I think it's different with our kids. They understand they're starting to understand like, hey, it's okay to feel. Like I could feel like my son, I have no idea how this is possible, but he's 2.5 years old and he'll start crying, he'll start crying. And then you ask him like, "Hey man, what's wrong, bud?" And he'll tell you how he feels. Like, "I'm scared," or "I'm upset." And you're like, "Oh, okay, what's going on? Why you feel that way?" And he actually is able to sit there and try to express it through the emotion. He's still feeling it, but trying to tell you how he feels too. And I think that's so important to start that as young as possible to help not get all those challenges and those obstacles up.
Absolutely. And I'm so happy to hear you say that. I think, and especially as you say, start as young as possible because we have to remember that the brain is developing, especially from birth until adulthood. It continues to develop afterwards, but it kind of slows down and how quickly change happens. Change is possible for our entire lifespan, right, within our brain. But it's really these formative years that are super important for developing concrete circuitry and connections in the brain that provides the foundation for the way the rest of our life is interpreted and engaged and the lens through which we see life. Like my lived experience has affected the way that I see life, which would be different from your lived experience affecting the way you see life. So we might both be in the exact same situation, but you have a different perception than I do because of these things from our childhood and as we've grown up, how it has kind of shaped the way we understand life. So when we think of, our young kids and helping them to embrace their emotions from young and talk about this, just imagine when your son is in his 20s and he's had a tough day at work and he goes home to his partner and he's just, acting out of ordinary. He can take that moment to say, you know what? I had a hard day. This is what I'm feeling, and how much more productive that would be for that relationship, right?
Mhm.
So it definitely, the things that the foundations we lay from childhood is so important for the person that our kids would become tomorrow and in a decade or two. And it's very, very important. So I'm happy that the narrative is changing and we're actually changing the way we look at mental health, the way we talk about it, and giving permission for our kids to kind of exist in a space where they're allowed to fully understand what's happening within their body and be curious about, well, why am I feeling this way, right? That's such an important skill to learn from a young
Mm-hmm.
age.
What is your take on therapy when it comes to people going to therapy? Do you think that everyone should go, or just a certain amount of people, or once they get to a certain point, they should go?
It's interesting. I think therapy is very, very beneficial. And it's not only beneficial when you have a need, like if you're in crisis and you need support. Healthy people go to therapy too. folks who folks who want to understand a bit more about themselves, how they process life, how they process the world, right? How they process their emotion, and to adopt strategies for handling life. So it can be a very proactive thing as opposed to always being reactive,
Mhm.
right? I think for a long time, given the fact, and this is a problem, but given the fact that, mental health services are not well supported in terms of creating access to it in healthcare, access to it in our benefits, all these kinds of things, people just can't
Yeah.
afford it. So they're not going to go to it every week or every other week or once a month because it's just not a priority on the list of other things they have to support, like their rent, their mortgage, groceries,
Hmm.
putting food and clothes, keeping themselves warm and well fed. So it's not that high on people's priority list because they just don't have the funds to support going on a frequent basis. But therapy is not something that should only be accessed when there is a crisis. It has benefit as therapists are trained with strategies to help us figure out how to connect the emotion part of our brain to the cognitive part of our brain and how to do that effectively. They have strategies to help us do that. So when we do encounter situations within our lives, we can apply those skills and potentially go through it. There will still be bumps, but potentially go through it in a much more productive way than if we didn't have those resources, right? So it's not only something that could be engaged after crisis, it could be engaged when you feel well and you just want to know more about yourself, learn some strategies, and understand how you want to be and show up in life. And that could be really advantageous. Hopefully, changes happen in the near future where there are more supports within insurance and healthcare to kind of support folks accessing this service without it being such a hit to their pocketbooks,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like In my opinion, I think everybody should go because we go to the gym to, get physically better. We should go to therapy to become, because how else are you going to become not just mentally stronger, but emotionally stronger? We have no other means to
Absolutely.
become emotionally stronger other than going to therapy. And prevention is better than cure. If we're always going in the crisis mode, you could have prevented that. And so that process of actually getting through it is going to take, two, three, four times as long if you just would have gone before anything happened.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that.
So I kind of want to segue into one of the topics that you talk about a lot, which is a topic I cannot speak on. I've tried to speak on it, and I was like, "Wow, I'm really terrible at this." Which is the what you commonly talk about, which is dose when it comes to the brain chemicals. So could you elaborate on what dose is and kind of go into detail on each one a little bit?
Absolutely. So when we talk about DOSE, it's really just a clever acronym that we use to help us to remember a group of brain chemicals. They're called neurotransmitters. So neuro meaning like nervous system. Transmitters means they help to transmit messages. So neurotransmitters that support our wellness and our kind of positive emotions, right? So when we say dose, the D stands for dopamine, the O stands for oxytocin, the S stands for serotonin, and the E stands for endorphins. And these are four brain chemicals that are really well documented in science to connect to pleasure and reward. So when we talk about dopamine, we're talking about if we set goals, that happiness we feel after we kind of write out a plan. We haven't achieved the goal as yet, but we've written out a plan and we feel like we're organized and we feel like we're on our way to accomplishing something. That kind of happy feeling that we have, that's dopamine. That's the action of dopamine. Dopamine is really activated in anticipation of getting a reward for something or reaching some kind of goal. It really is one of those powerful types of neurotransmitters. Dopamine is also activated. The pleasure we experience if we do love to read after we read a great book, or after we exercise, or after a really good night's sleep, or when we get organized, we make a plan, right? All these kinds of things helps us to increase the action of dopamine in our brain to lead to an experience of pleasure or an anticipation of a reward or that we've accomplished something, right? So that's dopamine. And those are a few ways that we can activate it, right? Listening to music, reading a book, exercising, getting enough sleep, making a plan, getting organized, all those kinds of things. Oxytocin is another neurotransmitter or brain chemical that is activated when there is connection. Now, interestingly, we as human beings are highly social beings. Like our brain is programmed to gain or to experience reward from social connections. And oxytocin is one neurotransmitter in particular that's involved in us feeling authentically connected to another person or another thing. So it could be an animal as well, for example. So things that really activate oxytocin is when we give someone a hug, or we tell someone how much we care or we love them, right? Or someone shares a compliment with us, or we have a really great, authentic, vulnerable conversation with someone we trust that just gives us that feel good supported feeling, or we play with our pet, or we make love, or we get a massage, or we cuddle with someone. Even when we volunteer within the community or in organizations, that feeling of connectedness we feel, that's oxytocin. And that's another really key neurotransmitter when we talk about wellness in the brain, that oxytocin needs to be there, right? To help us to feel connected to others or things,
Mhm.
right? The S stands for serotonin, and that neurotransmitter is really engaged in helping us to feel contented. Now, interestingly, when we talk about depression for a second, one of the groups of medications that are used to treat depression are called SSRIs, and they stand for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So when we kind of break that down, selective serotonin, so selecting only for serotonin reuptake inhibitors, It's allowing serotonin to not be reuptake, like not be reabsorbed into the cell, but to stay within the brain, swimming around for a longer piece of time so that it can activate those happy receptors. So what SSRI does, it blocks the ability for serotonin to be removed from what we call the synaptic region, which is the region between cells, so that it has a longer ability to connect and do something. Right. So that being said, serotonin is a really important neurotransmitter when we think about wellness and think about feeling contented and happy. Right. So some ways that we can activate and encourage the action of serotonin is by what we eat. Because interestingly, neurotransmitters are created through breaking down the food that we eat. It goes into our gut, it breaks it down, it extracts the right kind of products from it, and then resynthesizes into the neurotransmitters we need. 90% of our serotonin is created in our gut.
Wow.
So that is really an important thing to realize when we're thinking about the importance of what we eat and how that helps our brain and serotonin production. Another thing is exposing ourselves to sunlight. When we started talking, you mentioned 2 days of sun and you feel much better. That's serotonin, right? It helps with serotonin production and the activity of serotonin. Managing stress, right? Practicing gratitude, meditating, praying. These things help us to, even cold showers and essential oils, right? These things help us to activate or influence the action of serotonin, which also helps with our well-being. And the last one is endorphins, the E of it. And endorphins is this really, really cool hormone that helps us relieve pain. So think about after you go to the gym and you got in there and it's super hard for you to get going because your muscles are hurting. You've been there all week. And you just start exercising and that pain just goes away and you could actually get through your routine or your workout. That's the action of endorphins. Endorphins are our natural pain reliever. So how we activate or influence the actions of endorphins are through things like exercising. We can also do it when we dance, when we laugh, when we go to a really good comedy show, or, look at a really funny movie and we walk away and say, that was so good and we feel so awesome, right? That's endorphins. Aromatherapy can do it. Acupuncture can do it. Even sweating in a sauna can do it. These are things that can activate endorphins. So when we talk about dose, we're talking about these four neurochemicals. So we're talking about dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And the more we activate these chemicals in the things we do daily in our lifestyle, in just our daily way of living, is the more we support the action of these chemicals in our brain that would then support our well-being. So it's really important that we have these tasks kind of factored into our days to help us to connect to wellness again.
All right, could you give 5 tips on how we can maximize the benefits of those 4 brain neurotransmitters?
So how we can maximize it. Tell me more about what you mean.
How do we reap those benefits the most? Like things that we could do that would reap those benefits the most?
Right. So interestingly, and I think after this, I can send you a little PDF that I have that dictates a whole bunch of tasks that we know are linked scientifically to the activation of these neurotransmitters. So what I always encourage people to do, it's like, hey, you already do these things all the time. Now you know it's actually impacting your brain in a great way. So post this somewhere as a resource or save it on your phone or do something where you could refer back to it and say, oh my goodness, I am not having the greatest day. My mood is a bit impacted. What should I do? Maybe I'll go take a cold shower, right? Or maybe I'll go to the gym, or maybe I'll have a healthy meal, or maybe I'll take a nap, or maybe I should try working with music if I want to kind of motivate myself more. It gives kind of tips as to how we can activate these chemicals, these neurotransmitters. So I think the way we maximize the impact of them is by doing these tasks regularly and making sure that there are these kinds of activities factored into every day of our life, or as often as we could, to make sure that we are supporting healthy activity of these chemicals and its impact on the body. One really important thing that I know it's very hard for a lot of people, including myself, to do is eat well and exercise. Eat well, exercise, drink water. Get a good night's sleep. These are things that impact these chemicals and impact our wellness very much, right? Eating well, again, factors into the production of serotonin and other neurochemicals that the brain uses to support well-being, right? So making sure that we have foods that are high in antioxidants, right? And are high in nutritional value, vitamins and minerals. Also, exercise, because it's protective to the brain. When we exercise, we actually influence, a growth factor called BDNF, which is the brain-derived BDN neurotrophic factors, right? Which helps to protect the brain. BDNF, it helps to protect the brain and the brain cells. So it helps for resilience, and it helps to the resilience of our brain cells, and it helps them to function well longer. So exercising really does create that environment for brain health, right? These kinds of things are really very impactful when we think about how it's impacting the ability of our brains to stay healthy and stay within a wellness space.
So one other topic I wanted to discuss was stress, and how essentially how the two topics are connected, where we're talking about dose and then we talk about mental health. And a lot of people suffer from not just stress, but chronic stress. So
Yeah.
how do we lessen that stress levels, or how do we work through that?
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting because there are so many health conditions out there that are related to stress, right? And I think, it's interesting because in small doses, stress can be actually quite advantageous. If we see a lion, right, and we get stressed out and anxious, that's helping to protect our lives by creating that stress response so that we can say, what do we do next? It suppresses, we have two systems in our body called the parasympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system. And it suppresses that stress response, suppresses our ability to relax and digest our food and think, and all of our systems to kind of flow as they do. Whereas when we are stressed out, it suppresses that so it can divert more resources to the brain's response and ability to act quickly to sustain life. So in acute stages, stress is very advantageous, right? We have adrenaline flowing. We have that stress response that's there to keep us safe from danger. The challenge is it actually, in that stress response, in the acute stage, it helps with our alertness, it boosts our performance, our memory, right? But the challenge is when we get into chronic stress, when we can't turn off that stress response, when we can't control the brain's kind of understanding of a bad performance review is not a threat to my life. It's a working plan to get me to do better at work. Or a tough conversation with a partner is not a threat to my life. It's an opportunity to see how we can work through some of the sticky areas in our relationship so that we can move past. Our brain does not distinguish between a lion and a bad job review, or a lion and a tough conversation. So in terms of the stress response, so we have to figure out these things that are not life-threatening. How do we manage this stress? How do we find productive ways? And this is connecting back to our therapy talk. That's where therapy can help. How can we develop these strategies and skills to better deal with these situations that we feel are quite stressful, that is not allowing us to turn off this stress response? The interesting thing about prolonged stress and cortisol within our brain, which is our stress hormone, is that it starts to break down on very key brain areas. So prolonged cortisol in our brain, we start to see atrophy in our prefrontal cortex. And this is the part of our brain that's connected to decision making, complex thinking, all planning, all these kinds of things. This part of the brain begins to atrophy or break down to long periods of cortisol. What that means is that we can't regulate emotional parts of our brain, particularly the amygdala, which is a brain region connected to fear and the processing of emotions generally, but also like a heightened processing of negative emotions. So now we have the amygdala that can't be downregulated by our prefrontal cortex because all this cortisol is happening, and it becomes problematic for us figuring out the right strategy for that situation. It also starts to break down cortisol, prolonged cortisol in our brain starts to break down our hippocampus. And the hippocampus is the part of the brain that's linked to learning and memory. So when you can't remember where you put your keys because you've been stressed out, I remember a time in my life when I had an awful time, very stressful time at work. And I was beginning to forget where I put my keys. Like, you come home, you're so tired, you drop your keys somewhere. And for the life of me, I couldn't remember where I put my keys, or I can't remember phone numbers that are common to me or familiar to me. Or I couldn't remember, what was I thinking about 10 minutes ago? How does it relate to this topic? That was the impact of stress. It's almost like temporary amnesia, because your brain does not have the right resources because the stress response is on, right? So it impacts memory and learning in kids. Just imagine how that can impact their performance at school if they're constantly stressed out in a very toxic environment. As adults, we're still learning. We go to work and we learn a new tool or technique or technology, and we have to apply that to a new task at work. We're learning constantly. Even a new recipe has aspects of learning. So we learn throughout our entire life, and prolonged cortisol impacts the ability for us to learn and remember things because it starts to atrophy the hippocampus. So I say all of that to say that prolonged stress is not good for your brain, because cortisol is a toxin. It's a neurotoxin, which means it has toxic properties to the brain, and it starts to break down these key areas of the brain that helps us to really thrive in life, like areas of the brain connected to decision making, complex thinking, learning, memory, and emotion control. When we talk about dose and we try to connect it, now dose is never going to fix a mental illness. It doesn't have that power, right? What dose helps us to do, that is when we activate dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, it helps us to manage or maintain a wellness balance within our brain. But when it doesn't fix illness, it helps us to maintain health, right? It helps us to improve brain chemistry, to support a mentally healthy life. It helps us to cope, right? If we're dosing our brain repeatedly, we might say, okay, I'm having a really stressful day. I'm going to go to the gym and do cardio for half an hour, see how I feel. Or I'm going to power walk in nature for half an hour, see how I feel. Or I'm going to have a really healthy meal, or I'm going to go sleep. It helps us to cope. But if we dip into mental illness from prolonged stress, we need a more aggressive treatment plan than just dosing our brain. And that's when we need to see our doctor. That's when we need to go to therapy. That's when we need to kind of figure out, how do I, support my mental health in a more like crisis mode. It's the same thing. Like if we play, my son is an elite basketball player. And if he twists his ankle in practice, he can say, I can rest this for a few days, I'll be okay, right? So he's coping. He knows how to fix that by doing the right behaviors for 3 to 5 days to fix that ankle so he can get back on the court. That's coping, right? But if he breaks his ankle, now he's in crisis mode. And he needs to go get an x-ray. He needs to see a doctor. He needs to see someone who can tell him how to fix this broken bone. So there is an element of dose that helps us to cope with life's ups and downs and potential challenges on an ongoing basis, but it's not going to fix an illness. When we dip into life situations that impact our quality of life in a significant way, that's no longer a dose problem. That's you go see a doctor and you see if you need medication, you see if you need therapy, you see if you need a combination of both or one or the other, right? So that's the connection between dose and wellness. It can help us cope with life, maintain mental health. But if we dip into illness where prolonged stress becomes so challenging that it's significantly affecting our quality of life for extended periods of time, like when we look at the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual version 5, which is basically the Bible for diagnosing mental health illnesses. When we look at that, a lot of the criteria says it's significantly impacted your quality of life from 6 months or more. So when we have conditions that impact the quality of your life for 6 months or more, that's when we're talking about a clinically significant diagnosis that needs a medical doctor to support your wellness.
Wow. So you mentioned that this also happens in kids, correct?
Yeah, well, kids can be stressed out as well. We think about so many kind of environments that kids are growing up in right now, the dynamics between parent and child, caregiver and child, or the absence of that, right? Even the dynamics among peers. We're talking about a time in life where social media and just this digital space can be so toxic at times for kids that they can experience so much stress from bullying or even the pursuit of comparing themselves to an idealized version of the life that they may want that they may never reach by the images that are coming across in social media, right? They're living in a very, very hard time. And a lot of kids are living very stressful lives because of what they're experiencing. So it's also really important to keep an eye on our kids and say, okay, if we think they're acting out of character or something is just different or something, they seem to be challenged in some area, providing an opportunity for open conversation so that you can engage in that conversation with them and not hesitating to say, well, let's talk to the doctor about it and see if they can help us, to see if we need that kind of next level of interventions.
Wow. I think that's important for everybody to hear and understand that kids can go through all this too. This isn't just an adult problem.
Absolutely.
Like social media is terrible right now for the kids.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you know what? I believe that it's interesting because the kids' brains are still developing, as we mentioned earlier as well, right? Social media could be a really positive space where if we are selective in who we follow, what type of content we get, it could be quite motivating and inspiring. But if we don't have that insight to kind of make those decisions about the accounts that we follow our activity on there, it could also be very detrimental. And as a child is developing and those decision-making parts of their brain is still immature until mid-20s, if they are not that selective in who they are following, what their activity on social media looks like, it could impact the images, the information that they are, partaking in that could affect their mood, could affect their mental health, could affect their wellness. So stress is a really big thing when we think about social media and the world that youth are navigating through and how we have to guide them or support them in healthy connections and access to healthy types of information and kind of monitoring the usage of to kind of support better decision making and hopefully protect their mental health and their wellness.
Yeah. So now that we're getting near the end of the episode, I have three final questions, which I ask all guests, and these are over the topics of what this podcast is: live, love, and grow. So the first question that I have for you is, what advice can you share about how to create a life that leaves a positive impact on the world?
So I think that we all have a lived experience that makes us passionate about something. There's something within our life that has piqued our interest or our experience in life that has us become passionate about something. And I do believe that we live in a global community where my passion might be mental health and well-being and supporting folks in that because that's just my journey in life. But someone else's passion could be food,
Yeah.
right? And the best recipes and all those kinds of things. And then they could support that aspect in my life. So what I think about when I think about a life creating a life that leaves a positive impact on the world, I think about everyone living your passion out loud and allowing people to, absorb your awesomeness the same way you're benefiting from someone else's awesomeness, because we don't all have the complete package. It really is a global community. And I think we live better when we're all at our best. So what I think in leaving a positive impact in the world is lean into your passion and do it out loud and have people just really enjoy your awesomeness and just don't hesitate, just do
Mhm.
it. So that's what I think is super important for leaving a positive impact on life. And more often than not, it has to do with pouring outwards as opposed to looking inwards. When we think about people's passion, there's always a benefit to someone else when they're doing that. So I think that that's a real secret that I would love to encourage everyone on doing, is just leaning into your passion and letting the world just kind of witness your awesomeness. Don't be
Mhm.
afraid.
So that leads me to my next question, which is, what are some practical ways people can cultivate self-love?
Accept yourself for who you are, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between, right? I think we are all a work in progress. We can't all expect to be perfect or an ideal being. And I think self-love is accepting yourself where you are and being okay with that,
Mhm.
right? If I am in the midst of a growth opportunity, I'm okay sitting in there because at the other end of this, I'm going to come out with skills and knowledge that I didn't have before that situation came about. So, really embracing challenges as a way of growing, embracing good, happy life experiences as a ways to celebrate where you've come or what is happening in the meantime, and not being afraid to continue to grow. And that self-love is a willingness to accept yourself as is right now, and for that to be enough. And to know that they're within accepting yourself as you are right now, there are always going to be growth opportunities. If there's no growth opportunities, you're probably lying to yourself because everyone needs to continue to grow to get to their ideal, to some state where we are really the best we can be. So to cultivate self-love, I think a big secret there is to just accept yourself as you are right now in this moment and know that you are okay exactly where you are.
So my third and final question is, what is one actionable tip someone can do today to grow 1% better?
I think take time for self-reflection. Sometimes my biggest stress points in my life is when I don't slow down to say, Krissy, why do you feel this way? Why are
Mm.
you thinking that? Why did you make that decision? Why do you feel anxious? If I don't slow down to ask myself those questions when the time comes, it's like a spiraling effect of chaos,
Mhm.
right? But I think when I pause to self-reflect, I have a better opportunity to understand about myself and also to understand how I can grow in this moment and also what I need. If I feel really taxed and I'm really agitated and I reflect on that, then I can say, okay, maybe I just need to take this afternoon off to go take a walk, read a book, listen to music. But if I didn't take that time to reflect and I push through the day, imagine the monster I might be that evening to my kids and my partner, right? Like it would be
Mhm.
chaos. So I think for me personally, what has helped me to grow tremendously over the past few years is to not deny myself moments of self-reflection, to really look inward and see what's going on with me and how can I adjust to make sure that I'm okay.
I love it. Those are some great answers. How can people connect with you?
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for having me. This was a great conversation. I talk a lot, so I know that, there was a lot of stuff coming at you there. But I do appreciate this, and I appreciate an opportunity to share with your audience. I'm on Instagram, so my handle is dr.krissy.phd, Dr. Krissy, PhD. So I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn. Those are the only two social media platforms that I am on. I also have a website, drkrissy.com. You spell the entire word out, DOCTORKRISSY.com. You can learn a little bit more about me, what I do, and some services I provide there. And that's it. Yeah.
And how can we, as the audience, support you on your journey?
I think that's an interesting question because I'm always like, how can I support you? Like, what information do you want to hear and the information that would be most useful in your life? I think, and that is so fulfilling for me. That really helps with my dose, connecting authentically with folks and knowing that what the information I share is helpful. Right now, I don't really see a way that the audience can help me other than continuing to engage. Let me know what's working for you and what's not working for you, and what information you want to know more of. Because I think my goal is to make the information accessible and something that could be useful in folks' life, and not just something that sounds good or for the 15 seconds that you might be listening on social media.
Well, Dr. Christie, this really was a blast. And yes, it was a lot of information, but it was very valuable information too. And it's conversations that we need to have as people, talking about mental health, talking about how do we make ourselves better, our brain, etc. And I just want to thank you for coming on here. You were one of the top people I had when I first started my podcast of who I wanted as a guest on my podcast. So I really appreciate having you on here.
Thank you so much, Matt, again. And I hope this episode really helps someone.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast. I hope you took something away from this episode that you can implement today, just like I did. After doing some research, I found out that in order to be considered a 1% podcaster, you have to make it past episode 20. This week marks episode 20, and in honor of that and your continued support, I'm hosting my very first giveaway. It's my way of giving back to you for showing your support. Now, there are two different ways to enter to earn a $25 Amazon gift card. The first way is by leaving a review. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, take a screenshot, and send it in via my website, mattfindora.com. One lucky winner will be drawn from this group. The second way is by sharing this podcast on Instagram or LinkedIn and tag me in it. It can be a clip I've shared, your favorite episode, or the episode you're listening to right now. The second winner will be drawn from these individuals. The winners will be announced via email and on April 29th podcast. So make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss your name being called. And once again, thank you for supporting me and this podcast. Good luck. No matter what you choose to do, choose to live, love, and grow. Thank you and have an outstanding day.